assistant instructors, how to make a presentation, I want to ask myself, what is the objective? What do we want to accomplish with this session, right? So what do you think the objective is of teaching an assistant instructor how to make an academic presentation?
So to prepare them to be able to disseminate good information to the students that they're assisting and teaching that portion, but also to secondary to prepare them for the ITC so that one day they can go on their own and move on to being a full instructor of their own.
Correct. And so your job as an assistant instructor trainer, you actually have the hard part of the job, right? You are laying that foundation. And the better you train your assistant instructors, actually the easier it's going to be on the instructor trainer. I have hopped in, with assistant instructors that that just weren't quite there yet. They really struggled with academic presentations, and it's not always the assistant instructor's fault. Let's just put it that way. They can only know what they were told or taught, and never do I want my candidates to feel like that they have to seek outside knowledge, meaning I don't want them to try to Google how to make a presentation or reach out to another instructor trainer and say, I'm completely confused, can you help me? I see my job as the assistant instructor trainer as, I take my job very seriously. And even if I'm just preparing them just to be an assistant instructor, they have no desire to move on to becoming a full open water instructor, I am still training an instructor. And that's kind of the point that I was trying to get across to David yesterday, that an assistant instructor is an instructor, and we need to prepare them to take on that position and that job. So anytime that I'm speaking to a candidate, I really try hard not to lecture and critique and just say, okay, you did this wrong, you did that good, you did this wrong, and go down the list. Instead, I try to use it as an extension of the training session. So, talking about her first presentation, section 3 of the perfect buoyancy course. So her objective was, we need to ask ourselves, and this is how I do it. I said, okay, so your objective, let's look at that. Do you remember exactly what you said? And I'm reading, like I mentioned, I have the course open up in the professional view so I can see the objectives. And if she's reading them verbatim, I don't need to write that down. I can see she knew where to find that information. She may be putting it in her own words, but she is following what SSI has asked her to follow. But I do write down the little intro, the catchphrases that I hear her say in the beginning. Is she making it measurable? So SSI, like I said, SSI says, after completing this section, you will be able to. That is their way of making it measurable. She said, today we are going to, and then she listed the objectives. Does that tell us when? To make it measurable, it has to tell us when. So did that tell us when?
Sure.
Yeah, it definitely did. So I gave her a 3 on her objectives because not only did she give me the objectives that SSI wanted her to cover in that section, she also made it measurable by telling me when we were going to learn that. Then the value, I believe you took off some points for her value, but she gave me the need to know. Why do I need to listen? I didn't have a problem with her value. But had I would have said, because she's made notes, she didn't just wing it. I would have asked her, do you mind reading your value statement to me again? And I would have used the opportunity to, if there were any way, if I had had a problem with it, which I did not, I would have then tried to encourage her to find a different way of wording it. Or maybe let's think about a different value. What would be a better value for this topic, right?
Sure. And on that one, I gave her all threes on section one.
Oh,
I, and I, with the admonishment of, we're teaching to the right level, but just be aware if we were teaching to a more advanced class, we'd want to be a little bit more detailed in that dynamic. But
right.
teach, certainly know your audience is always a key.
Okay, and so when it came to main points, I would have asked her to restate her main points. What were they? Because, like I mentioned to you earlier, I get my main points by going to the index off to the side, and it tells me the main points are diving techniques, positively buoyant on the surface, buoyancy control, developing proper breathing patterns, the effects of breathing, proper weighting, establishing neutral buoyancy. Because she did not stick with these main points, she put them in her own words, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Not really.
Absolutely nothing wrong. But when they put them in their own words, you need to see that they've covered everything in that section. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so, and it needs to be in logical sequence. And this is the sequence that SSI put it in. So I like to try to keep it as close to this sequence as possible. And it's not that she didn't do that, but either she didn't do, so I can count it one of two ways. Either she didn't cover proper weighting and establishing neutral buoyancy, which she did, but she did that in the beginning. And so we have to decide if we are going to counsel her on logical sequence or on main points. Does that make sense?
It does.
Now, like I said yesterday, the first presentation that someone does with me, I'm not going to get nitpicky about teeny tiny itty bitty things. But anything safety, anything that was just you completely missed the mark, it is my requirement. It is my job to explain how that could have been done better and help them rewrite this presentation to make it better. So I did take off one point on the list of the main points because it wasn't. I like main points to be a list. Now that's not a requirement, but it helps people follow along with the progression of the course. What we are going to achieve and how we are going to achieve it. And the main points tell us both of those.
Sure.
And knowledge and skills, practical application of the knowledge. Oh my goodness. I mean, she was phenomenal. This is an area where I can really help her gain more confidence because she was very prepared for the presentation. And if not, like I said, I would take this time to us reread through this section of the Perfect Buoyancy course, and I would take it upon myself to reteach her that section to make sure that she understands, because not everyone had an incredible Perfect Buoyancy instructor. We don't know what, maybe they haven't even ever taken that course before. So we may need to, at times, reteach this material because they're going to need to have a thorough understanding of it so that they can teach it once they're an assistant instructor. But she did beautiful on that one. Equipment, she mentioned the regulator, and she told us why. She gave me a clear reason why I needed a regulator, but she really didn't go into where would I go to buy it, how much does it cost? You guys talked about how different how you've done tests and how different regulators perform, and I loved that. But But how am I, as the student, on my own going to perform those tests? I don't know enough about that information. So if she's going to sell a regulator, then I need to know, I need to be motivated to purchase it. So I need to know where I should go. Are you going to come with me and help me? Because if she had said, you know what, Benjamin and Janine, after this, let's go up front and let's go in the store and I will show you the different regulators that our store sells. And I'll explain to you the differences, because when you start talking about balancing and all of that, your students are thinking, I can't buy a regulator. I am not smart enough to understand what they're saying. And so at this level, if you mentioned this, at this level, you want to keep it appropriate to their level of training. They may not have had the equipment's techniques, or they may not be a Mari's service technician, and so I do try to keep it at a language that I understand that they can understand, but not dumb it down. If that does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like explain to them that different regulators breathe differently. But to give us a motivation to purchase, we need to offer an opportunity to purchase that item. Now, I did agree with a buoyancy control device would have been a better choice. And so when we have a question about what equipment they were going to sell, we go back to our criteria, right? So for her to have scored a 3 on equipment sales, counseling, and motivation to purchase, she had to give a specific example of equipment use that related to the topic and delivered a clear value and motivation to purchase. BCD is a definite, you know, good choice, but she did give us specific examples of that regulator and how we use it to control our buoyancy. So I wouldn't have taken off a point for the type of equipment that she tried to sell me, but I did have to take off a point because of motivation to purchase. So we both took off a point there, but for different reasons,
Sure.
right? And then promoted continuing education and local diving travel. I definitely would have asked her to refresh my memory on what she promoted, because I didn't hear anything. Did you? What did you score on that?
I scored her a 3 on that, and I should have scored her a 2. But we talked about dive travel, and going to Cozumel and different places like that. So
Mhm.
I'll go back and watch the video on that as well, just to make sure. But I should have scored her a 2 there. So
Well, so talking about how you and I went to Cozumel, that does add excitement. That does cause interest in that. But how I counsel my assistant instructor candidates is give them a specific example.
sure,
When are we going to Cozumel? How much does it cost? How many people are allowed on the trip and how many spots are already taken? What are we going to do when we get there? Are you going to be diving with me the whole time, or am I just going to be on my own? So
sure,
to get a 3 on that one, she had to have introduced and created value for a specific continuing education program or a specific local diving travel opportunity and identified a clear pathway to continue their education or experience. And so, yes, I could have given her, kind of a hand me out point on that one, because we did talk about traveling, but we talked about y'all traveling, not the other students, not the students wanting to go on this trip so that we can continue our experience or our education. I we fall. I see a lot that the easy way is to choose continuing education, because we have that SSI poster in the dive center, and you can see all the amazing specialty courses that we can promote. And one problem that I see is what is the natural progression? You are in perfect buoyancy now. You've taken open water diver. What course would you recommend next? It has to correlate to the topic, and it has to go along with the natural progression. I'm not going to go from perfect buoyancy to gas blender. That has nothing to do with each other. And so we want to make sure that we counsel our assistant instructors that are training with us that it has to, in order for them to want to take that course, it has to be within their reach. It has to be something that is at their level of training. So what would you, Benjamin, counsel her on as far as if she didn't choose local travel, if she chose continuing education, what course would you recommend that she promote?
An easy one would have been photo video, because that was something that was brought up throughout the class in the class was how to take better photos, or the challenge of buoyancy in photos. So photo video would have been an easy segue over to that as well. And then maybe a night and limited viz, because perfect buoyancy definitely has a higher degree of need when you can't see what you're going to crash into.
Yeah.
So either one of those would have been real easy ones to transition. Probably photo video would have been the most logical, because since it was already mentioned, and you certainly go the direction the student needs and desires, and so there was talk of photo video already.
Well, and I love that you picked up on that, because my comments that I make during their presentation, if I am playing the role of the student, I'm trying to lead them, I'm trying to help them. And so by me saying, but what about photo and video? I can't, if I can't control my buoyancy, I can't get that crisp, perfectly focused photo. And it didn't happen. I wasn't obvious enough. Come on, tell me to take the photo and video course, right? But I'll do that to try to help set them up for success, at least in the beginning presentations. At the end, I know nothing. And I may even give a little bit of inaccurate information to try to help them learn how to deal with that, because it will happen at some point. A student will misunderstand and say something inaccurate. So, but on that first one, I just try to kind of help lead them in that way. Safe and accurate information on the topic. So what did you score her on that?
On continuing education or safe and accurate? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you scored on experience on part 3 of section 2.
Oh, I gave her a 0. Now I could have given her a 1, and now that we've discussed it, I probably would give her a 1. But there was no mention of continuing education. There was talk of travel, but not a specific travel experience. So let's go back to the standards and let's see. To get a 1, she mentioned a continuing education program, which she did not do, or local diving travel, but no details or value was offered. She probably met that criteria. Okay. And so with her and I discussing it, I would say, you know what, you are right. Don't you love my granddaughter's pencil? This is the only one that I could find in the whole house. So then I would say, you know what, you are right. You did not deserve the score I gave you. I was wrong. I'm going to change that score. Sure. So then I would have given her a 1 on that. Safe and accurate information. I know that you counseled her on that one.
I dinged her with a point because of the holding the breath, and coached with the idea that just bringing that up is in this position, in this place, is probably not the best plan. Just because students take out. I had a perfect example. I had a science and diving class with a young man who is way too eager to get to instructor. He's sure he's going to be instructor this month. He just barely finished master diver last month, and he's going to be an instructor. It's like, slow down. But he was in my science and dive class with several very advanced students, and one of my students is an MD, a surgeon that's taking this, and so as I did the presentations, I thought, well, who better to do a presentation for me on medical issues than, arterial gas embolism and metastatic emphysema than my surgeon. And he gave an amazing presentation that I didn't hit the record button on. I was really bummed on that I hadn't, but he got a little too deep into metastatic emphysema and talking about debriding the chest with a needle. And it's like, whoa, we need to slow down a little bit. This is entry level stuff. Well, it's interesting. This student went back to the shop owner and said, where do I buy a needle so that I can stab somebody in the chest? Oh, it gets better for an AGE. He says, I want to be able to solve an arterial gas embolism, so I need the right needle for that. And that was, and the owner called, he's like, why are you talking about using a needle for AGE? And I'm like, no. That wasn't even part of that conversation. He was talking about, metastatic emphysema. And, and I'm like, he's like, oh, he says, well, how do you get that? I says, I have no idea. And unfortunately, it's one of the few times I didn't have a recording, but he got from the way to cure an AGE is with stabbing somebody in the chest with a big needle. And I'm like, and so when I go back to that example, that students will misconstrue information in the most interesting and creative ways. So when it comes to holding my breath, especially in a perfect buoyancy course or any beginning course, I don't talk about holding my breath. If I can avoid that subject at all. So I hit her on that because I thought it's a concern. It didn't rise to the level of a standards violation or that, but it was definitely a concern. So I hit her at 2 on that one.
Okay, so let's look at the standards and just make sure that she deserved that too. Let's see. So to get a 2, she demonstrated sufficient knowledge related to the topic, but stated some inaccurate but not dangerous information.
Yes.
I think that falls into that. So you did very well on that score. But the one way that I would have handled it differently is I would have worked with her to say, how can we word this differently? Because how else can we say we need to take a smaller breath than usual and see if that affects our buoyancy. Or I would have just taken a moment to say, let's together figure out a better way to teach what we do, because we do hold our breath for a couple of seconds to get that reaction. But what's a better way that as a team we can work together to come up with how we can teach this and how we can explain that maybe if we take a smaller breath of air instead of a full breath of air, then we would see a difference in our buoyancy. I wouldn't tell her what to say. I would help her come up with a different or maybe a better way of saying it. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely.
Now, there are many times whenever I just flat out say, I do it this way. But my way is not always the best way. My way is maybe not the right way. I learn something from every instructor that I work with. And so I always say, this is how I do it, but tell me how you would do it. And maybe I'll steal your idea. Maybe I'll become a better instructor because together we problem solved this. And now we've come up with a better way of teaching it. So I try not to say it's my way or the highway, except when it comes to hose routing on side mount, but that's a different topic. So then we have completed information in logical sequence. I didn't have a problem with that. Did you?
I give her 3 on the next 2 of delivered environmental safe as well as completed logical information. So in that section, I gave her 6, 8 total points.
Right. And I agree with that. I try to explain to the assistant instructors that if their plan is to continue on to do their instructor training course, that during that instructor exam, that evaluator is trying to listen to the presentation, score, maybe make notes in the sideline. His his or her mind is going 1,000 different places. And so I always counsel my assistant instructors that make sure that it is clear that you are giving a safe diving practice message. You don't have to say, my safe diving practice message for today is, but somehow word it is, to be a safer diver, it is so important that you, or, in order to protect our environment, we need to. And so I heard safe diving practice messages all through her presentation.
Absolutely.
Obviously, she scored a 3, but to help counsel her on future presentations, in the event that that examiner wanted to hear the words safe diving or environmental, I just try to counsel that. I heard it, you did an excellent job, but remember, we want to make sure that that evaluator catches exactly what you were trying to say. But I definitely gave her a 3. Now, effectively used training aids, you gave her a 3, correct?
I did.
Okay, so let's pull out the criteria.
Candidate used training aids effectively to reinforce knowledge and understanding. 3, a candidate used more than one training aid effectively, and all training aids were related to the topic. So she didn't use
So
more than one, though.
she did not use more than one. And so there's no way that we can give her a 3. So now we need to look at a 2. Candidate used at least one training aid effectively, and or aids were not specifically related to the topic. I loved her PowerPoint presentation. That was extremely effective. It let me look at her PowerPoint presentation instead of me staring at my screen trying to figure out what we were talking about next. And so she definitely had one. So in my interpretation of the criteria, I cannot give her a 3 because she did not give me more than one. So I always teach my candidates, I want as many as you can throw in there. In
Okay.
order to make it an active learning session, I need to have training aids. Otherwise it's a lecture. And people, studies have shown that people just don't gain the knowledge that they need from a lecture format. And so in a real world environment, we would have been in a classroom and she would have had the SSI posters. And then she would have been able to say, okay, everybody, come on, get up out of your seats. Let's go look at this poster. So here's where we were. You took open water diver. Here's where we are now. We're taking the perfect buoyancy course. Let's look at all these other continuing education options. We referred to Janine had the question about photo and video. This is where that course is right here. And she could have used that as a segue into her continuing education choice to promote. We use whiteboards. If we're teaching maximum operating depth, why would I not give them a pen and paper and let them calculate it themselves, pen and paper, with me giving them examples on how to do that. Equipment. If we're talking about buoyancy, we need a BCD in that classroom. If
Sure.
we are going to promote selling a regulator, we need a regulator in the classroom. Now, Nikki is in her home. She's not at a dive center. So there is no judgment at all with her not having those training aids. But on our next ones, we need to make sure that we allow our pretend candidates to succeed by making sure that they have everything that they need to present us good training aids. I had an international training director tell me one time he wants 5. He teaches his candidates that they need 5 training aids. And I just teach, we have to have at least 2. Give me all that you've got. Make it fun, make it interesting, and make it exciting, because we know that that's how our students are going to learn best. Motivation and class participation. Oh my goodness, she nailed that. She did so good on that. The next one is ask questions to evaluate the student's knowledge. So I always tell my candidates, at a minimum, when you are in your summary and you are going over your main points at the end, evaluate the knowledge there. At a minimum, you state one of the main points or the first main point, and you ask them to give you back information that you gave them, so that we understand that everybody's on the same page here. But she went one step above that, and at the end of each main point, before she moved on to the next main point, she verified and evaluated our knowledge. And wow, kudos to her for that, because that was absolutely perfect. And like I said, so she got a 3, in my opinion, on class participation and evaluating the student's knowledge. Did you give her a 3 on both of those?
I did. Absolutely.
Excellent. Restated the main points. I did not write down her main points in the beginning. If people are going to do a PowerPoint presentation, I always say just stick them up there. If you're going to be going slide by slide, stick them up there. If you have a whiteboard, write them on the whiteboard. Then we are using that whiteboard as a training aid, right? So we can write our objective, our value, and our main points. And in my opinion, I feel like that helps keep your students on track as well.
Mm-hmm.
They know that right now we're talking about diving techniques, and they know next we're going to talk about being positively buoyant on the surface. And so I like my main points just to stay up there for the entire class. It keeps me on track, and it helps them see the progression that we've made. But this would have been a learning experience for Nikki and I. I would have said, okay, let's do this. What main points did you give me in the beginning? What main points did you give me at the end? And let's see how we can simplify this for you as the instructor. How can we just use what SSI has given us as the main points? And if you don't like how they're worded, let's see how we can put them in your teaching style. Let's make this your teaching style, but we have to cover all of the main points that SSI has given us. So this would have been a not just a counseling session, but a learning session, and we would have rewritten those main points or made sure that in her presentation notes that she probably had on a piece of paper in front of her, just go ahead and write it out. These were my main points at the first of the session. These are my main points at the end. As I'm going through these main points, I'm going to evaluate their knowledge again at the end of the session before I move on to restating that objective. And the objective at the beginning and the end, you may have taken a point off on the objective, but I flipped back, and that's what I'm saying. I have either the instructor manual, or I just prefer to do it online and click to that pro view. But I immediately go back to objectives. As soon as I hear those main points, I know what should follow, which would be restating the objectives. And so I go ahead and click on that, and I'm listening again for how is she making this past tense now? Because now that we have covered this topic, you are able to. It's not, we wouldn't just repeat. By the end of the session, you will be able to, because we've already done that. So by the end of the session, because I evaluated their knowledge throughout the presentation or at the end with the main points, they are able to accomplish that. We have accomplished that objectives. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And I thought she did a good job restating her objectives. Did you take any points off on that?
I did. I didn't really hear the objectives for me. So I gave, just to reiterate, for main points, I gave her a 3 for main points because she had them right from the slide. And then I gave her a 0 and a 0 on the values and the objectives because I didn't really hear a point of saying our objectives were this, and this is what we accomplished today. And the value to you is that you won't drown, or whatever it is, right?
Right. And I also did not hear a value at all. Before I So when I'm scoring, I don't put big checks because they're watching me. So I put a dot. Everybody starts with a 3. I want to give you a 3.
Sure.
But if you don't give me if you don't meet all the requirements in our criteria, I can't give you a 3. But let me see what I need to give you. And so then I read what you would get for a 2 and a 1 and a 0. I have put a little dot where nobody can even see it, basically, on value. And I'm going to ask her, okay, so in the beginning of your presentation, what was your value? That was an excellent value. You were spot on with that. So at the end, did you give me that value again? And I'll ask the question. I'm human. I may have completely missed it. And so before I say 0, fail, bad, I don't ever do that. I ask them the question, did you give me a value? They will answer honestly. And most of the time they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't. And they then accept that 0. Because I asked the question, did you give me a value? They realize they didn't, and they know I have no choice but to give them a 0.
Sure.
If I start off with, you got a 0, now they're like almost defending themselves. And that's why, as well, I don't tell them their score up front. I tell them pass, fail, basically. If it's a pass, I say you did well. I give them some encouragement and reassure them that it's a pass, because that's all they want to know. But if I tell them the score, they're on the defensive. Well, why did I get that instead of a perfect score? So I let them know they passed, and I wait to tell the score until the end. If it's a fail, I stop grading. I can tell pretty early on that we have a problem here. And if it's a fail, they don't get a score. There is no point in tearing them down. So if it's a fail, no score. And then we rewrite that presentation together. And it's a learning activity together. Typically, their very first ones are a bit of a struggle. And then somewhere in the middle, they get overly confident and they don't prepare quite as well as they should have. And
Sure.
we may need another training session there too. But then we get into the accomplished objectives. Most definitely. She gave a beautiful presentation, but that's not my opinion. I need to go back to the objectives and see, I'm so sorry.
Sorry to bother you. Do you know if the bar stools go?
I assume so.
Okay, I hope so. They're about to get
So,
lifted.
1 second, Benjamin.
It looks like they.
She said
go.
that everything goes except for those 3 boxes right there. Thank you. I am so sorry. Like I said, I'm house sitting and my daughter's moving. So, where were we? Oh, accomplished objectives. But it can't be my opinion. We need to look at the criteria and say, accomplished objectives. Did candidate provide sufficient information to meet all the objectives related to the topic? Did she give us enough information to describe the proper adjustment procedures for streamlining your equipment? I led her into that. I said, when I get at depth, I make sure it seems like everything gets a bit loose. I make sure I tighten it. I kind of led her into that, so I knew she got that one. List the proper procedures for buoyancy control. Most definitely. She covered that one very thoroughly. And identify and correct buoyancy problems. And yes, I mean, she did accomplish all the objectives, so I have no choice but to give her a 3 with that. And I believe you gave her a 3 as well, correct?
I did. Real quick on the previous section, restated objective. What was your score on that?
I gave her a 3. I mean, I could have been harsh and taken one off, but I pulled up the objectives. I saw that she was reading them. I didn't necessarily hear that it was measurable, but if in doubt, I don't take a point off. And because I wasn't sure if I heard that she made it measurable, I'm not going to ding her on that. But she did. Like I said, I pulled them back up and I saw that she she
Okay.
talked about those.
So back down to the next, and then accurate terminology, impression, speaking, mannerism. I gave her a 3 on.
Correct. And you could have so I don't take off points in 2 places. So if you took off a point for safe and accurate information on the topic because she said hold your breath for a couple of seconds, and she was very clear. She didn't just say just hold your breath throughout the whole time. Hold your breath for a couple of seconds, 2 or 3 seconds, until you feel your buoyancy change. That was, so I can either take that off there, or I can take it in accurate terminology, impression, speaking ability, and mannerisms. It just, let's see. I've got too many notes. So, but I didn't find any problems with her terminology, impression, speaking ability, and mannerisms. And just to get a 3, you have to have done those things well. So, and then effective use of time. Here is where, and this is a little secret between you and me and everybody watching this. Here is where, if it's really close between pass and fail, it is if they did not repeat themselves, and if they went over on time by 20%, I'm not gonna just say, well, I said 15 minutes, you were at 19 minutes. That is just not acceptable. She never gave us too much information. She covered, I probably wouldn't give this whole section as a macro teaching section, simply because there is a lot of information that needs to be covered. And so for a macro presentation, yes, 15 minutes, but as soon as she told me that she didn't just take a piece of the slice of that pie out and do that macro presentation, when she takes a whole section, I can't ding her for going over on time, because no one can cover that amount of information in 15 minutes. So whenever I'm handing out topics, I always make sure that I'm very specific. You are doing this slice of the pie. We are only going to cover this. Make reference to, yesterday we talked about the concept of buoyancy. Today we're going to talk about buoyancy in your body. And so you can make reference to what they talked about in the previous section. And like I said, over time, so I've been a certified assistant in enough instructor examinations, that I see all these topics that they're given for their presentations are taken directly from the material, that they've studied and that they know. And so lots of times I'll give the ones that I've seen, drawn, because our candidates draw a number and they draw their assignment sheet. And so lots of times I will give topics that maybe aren't exactly what I've seen given, but similar to just try to give them practice making those presentations. Now, it is not my position to help them make presentations in advance that they could happen to draw during the IE, right? I'm teaching them how to make a presentation over any topic at any time and turn it into and use the diver diamond in order to promote scuba diving and help increase our students' knowledge on the subject that they're talking about. But throughout this whole thing, I would have helped her improve her presentation, not me tell her where she did things that I would have done differently or better. The other thing that I wanted to counsel you on is when you're playing the part of the student, and fact of the life is, we just don't always have enough bodies as student to play the part of the student. And so most of the time we are also the student. I try to keep my answers short and let's be honest. Any assistant instructor trainer or instructor trainer, we have seen these courses taught. We definitely most of the time have more information than the candidate presenting the information. So I limit my answers to not teach that presentation, because if I give information and start teaching that presentation with my answers, then I've messed up her flow of her presentation. And now maybe I've said something that, darn it, she was going to say, and that was going to be the highlight of her presentation, but now I covered it and not her, and it will really throw them off their game. So I try to stick to answering their questions. Yes, sometimes I try to lead them if I see that they're going to forget to promote experience or education or safe diving practice message. But I try to minimize my answers also, because that can cause them to go over on time. If my answers are too long, then that can hurt and make her lose a point. So that is just how this is how I teach it. I'm not saying this is how you have to teach it. Now the second presentation wasn't quite as strong. And I believe you gave her a 47, somewhere in there.
No, second presentation, I gave her, the first presentation was a 45, which oddly enough, by my scoring, what we just talked about, we gave her the same.
Yeah.
So we both gave her 45s, just with some variances and reasons. But
Correct.
I was kind of excited about that, to be honest with you. On presentation number 2, I think I gave her a 43 overall. But I think I might have misadded as well, because I've got some other places in here that I missed, so I need to re-add. So I can do that real quick. Should take me about a
No,
minute.
let's talk about it first, because sometimes when we talk about it, sometimes we're able to refresh each other's memory, and sometimes our scores will change a little bit. So her objective was it in measurable terms. I wrote down, today we're going to talk about the buoyancy system. How did you feel about that objective?
I didn't think I thought the objective was fine. I didn't feel like it could have been. I could have felt it could have been sharper, so I gave her a 2 on it instead of a 3. I felt that it was acceptable. Let's see, where'd it go? Candidate provided some, but not all objectives, or the objectives were not stated in measurable terms. So I feel like she could have done a better job there. Measuring out at the end of this, you will be able to float.
Okay. So when we give them a slice of the pie and there's not an objective right there in front of them, I always advise them, look at the beginning of that section. So why don't you open the beginning of the section under your body and the aquatic environment and try in the SCUBA program, and it lists the objectives there. So first one is 5 airspaces. Second one is procedure used to equalize, components of the snorkeling system, effects of depth on light, most effective and efficient breathing pattern for SCUBA, and 3 basic rules of SCUBA. And we ask ourselves, do any of those have to do with the buoyancy system?
Fair enough.
No. So she had to make her own objective. So I always counsel, read the entire section, the entire buoyancy system section, before you decide on what your objective is. Because her objective was, today we're going to talk about the buoyancy system, I took off a point because that just wasn't thorough enough. That told me when today we're going to talk about it, but what part of the buoyancy system? You know, I needed a little bit more meat to that statement. But that was a Janine opinion. So we go back to the objective and measurable terms. Clearly stated, a measurable and in measurable terms all objectives related to the topic. Unless we go back and read through the whole section, you see what I'm saying? Did she give all objectives related to this topic, or did she provide some but not all objectives? Or the objectives were not stated in measurable terms. That's usually where most people fall when they're first learning to make a presentation, is scoring a 2 instead of a 3. But I don't disagree with you giving her the score that you gave her. Just two different ways of looking at it. Now, explain the value. I felt like she gave us a good value. How did you feel?
I felt it was wasn't clearly defined. When it came down to it, the criteria is candidate stated a clear need to know, as well as how this information will be applicable during the student's training or practice. I don't feel like there was a clear, why do I need to know this? And she certainly got there in the presentation, but with the information, you'll be able to float, right? Floating's good because you can breathe air or whatever it is. I certainly understate it, but I don't feel like there was a clear, why do I need to know this? And I just know working with these kids, these teenage girls and teenage boys on a regular basis, it's got to be very, very, look, dude, if you don't listen, you're going to drown. We don't want to use those terms, but there's times where you have to kind of shock them into submission of, oh, if I don't listen, I'll die. Yeah.
Well, and I definitely agree with what you're saying there. If you go ahead and click to the buoyancy system and you get in the professional view, they give us a value statement. So my word of counsel to her would be, there's nothing wrong with you creating your own value statement, but to make things easier on yourself, you could have just looked, because it says a well-fitted BC will keep the diver neutral during a dive and comfortable floating on the surface before and after the dive. Wow, that's an incredible value statement, right? Now, definitely, we need to have our own teaching style, and I need to word that in a way that sounds like Janine, not like it was written on a piece of paper and I just read it off. And when I give a presentation, like I said earlier, I write that objective on the board. I write the value on the board for 2 and the main points, but for multiple reasons. But one, so that I don't forget to give that value statement, because like you said, they have to know the why. Why should we even be listening instead of texting somebody on our phones? Because if you're dealing with teenagers, they probably have their cell phone out, right? But I did not take off any points for her value statement, but I respect your opinion on taking that point off. Provide overview with main points outlined. I went ahead and I wrote her main points. So she talked, number 1, about the parts of the BCD, 2, how to use the BCD, and 3, ways to inflate the BCD. She gave me she gave me a list, 3 clear main points. I loved it. I drew a little smiley face next to that because she gave me exactly what was required in the criteria. How about you? How did you feel about her main point?
I think she did a great job on that one, and I gave her a 3 on that one as well.
Good. And what did you give her on knowledge and skills, practical application of the knowledge?
Let's see, on practical application of the knowledge, I obviously gave her a 3. It was right on target with that. She understood that as well. Moving down to equipment of sales and consulting, and experience promoting continuing education. I gave her 2 zeros on those because there wasn't anything in there. And I don't know that I'd explained it to her, or maybe she hadn't picked up that this is an acquisition program. That the money's not in charging somebody $20 for a Discover Scuba for an hour. The money's in that covers costs, but it doesn't make profit. This is about getting them into the cycle. So I gave her a 0 on both of those.
I do agree that there was no equipment, sales, counseling, and motivation to purchase. And so, like I said earlier, her and I would have sat down and we would have said, let's figure out what equipment pertain to this topic? Buoyancy compensator, right? So that's the natural progression. Let's go ahead and sell them their own buoyancy compensator. Why should they purchase their own? Maybe we could tell a story about when we saw some rental equipment that wasn't in great condition. That would definitely give you a need to buy. Now let's offer them information. Where can I buy them? What brands do I personally recommend? And I make sure that they know I have used these brands and I can recommend these brands. I haven't used those brands. I am not saying that those are bad brands. I'm sure that they're adequate. I can just speak from experience that I like these brands and I like this specific BCD in this brand because. And I spend a little bit more time on the equipment sales and counseling just because I wholeheartedly believe it is in their best interest to own their own BCD. Then we have experience in promoted continuing education or local dive travel. I searched for that one. And so that she did not ever say, you need to do this. She didn't motivate me to do another course, but she did mention if you decide to continue on and do our open water diver course with us, we are going to build off of this knowledge and give you more knowledge. So I can give her a 1 on that because let's look at the criteria. She gave at least one example of equipment use and or examples were not specific. One example of equipment use and examples were not specifically related to the topic. Well, they were related to the topic because she talked about the BCD a lot. Hold on just one second. Promoted, I'm reading on the wrong one. Promoted continuing education. I am so sorry. So candidate mentioned a continuing education program or local diving travel, but no details or value was offered. I felt like it fell within that, it matched that criteria because she did talk about you may want to continue on in our open water diving program, but she didn't tell us when that class was going to be, how much that class cost, why, what they were going to learn that was different from just try scuba. I like to look, any course that I'm going to promote, I like to look up that course and see what are we going to do in that course. I look at the cue cards and that way I can come back and I can say, okay, if you do our open water course with us, we're going to start in confined water or in a pool session. And during this session, we are going to be able to do all these cool things. And I tell them, I don't mention we're going to take our mask off and swim without it on, but I say, I'm going to get you comfortable removing that regulator from your mouth while blowing bubbles and put it back in and just understand that, that what we are going to ask you to be practicing in our fourth session is it's going to prepare you and for diving in any environment. And I'll go into talking about, we get to do 4 open water dives. And during these 4 open water dives, we are going to, the first dive, we're going to go to Little Bite, and there there's a shallow area of less than 15 feet. And we're going to start off in that area and we're going to get you comfortable. There we can see butterfly fish and we can see triggerfish and we can see trumpet fish and get them excited about what they're going to get to do in that open water diver course. It kills me whenever somebody says, the next course that you should do is extended range foundations. Logical progression in their mind from perfect buoyancy into extended range is that foundations course, but they're not an instructor in it. They have no idea what we do during that course. So I always counsel them at a minimum, open that course up. If you don't have access to that course, contact me. I will give you the cue cards from that course so that you can look up and see, is that really the course that you want to promote? And maybe it is. Maybe it is the course that they want to promote, but you have to tell people why they should take that course and we have to tell them all the cool and fun things that they're going to learn during that course. So her just saying, if you decide someday to maybe do the open water diver course, yes, she mentioned another course, but I definitely wasn't motivated. So that is why I gave her a 1.
Gotcha.
Safe and accurate information on the topic. So it's not that I found that one was hard. Let's look at the criteria, because she didn't give me anything necessarily unsafe. I just didn't get a ton of information. So
Candidate should demonstrate a dive professional level of knowledge and state accurate and safe information specific to the topic. Candidate demonstrate extensive knowledge while providing accurate and safe information with safe and accurate information. So I give her a 3 on that.
Yeah. I felt like she was a bit off her game on that one, because the first one flowed so fluently, and there is no doubt in my mind that she is an exceptional tri-scuba instructor. Like, no doubt in my mind. But it felt to me forced, like she was looking for the appropriate words. She used some terminology like puffs of air, ditch weights, on surface ways to inflate. Like I said earlier, I'm either going to think, okay, do I take off for safe, accurate information, or do I take off in accurate terminology? And this felt more along the lines of accurate terminology, but the one that killed me was elevator button. And so here's how I handle that. I try to counsel my assistant instructors to tell the students what you want them to do. Start off with explaining what we want them to do and how they can achieve that. Stay away from the don't do it. Don't lead with this is not an elevator button. I call it an inflator and a deflator, and that is why we use it, is to inflate our BCD to control our buoyancy, or deflate our BCD to control our buoyancy.
Janine, I've lost your audio. Are you on mute? Or it doesn't look like you're on mute, but all of a sudden I've lost your audio.
Okay, is it back?
It's back, yeah.
Okay, somebody was trying to call on the
worries.
phone.
Let me switch mic, because I thought it was me, so I switched over to a different set of speakers.
No, the phone was just getting a call, and for some reason it cut off the audio on the computer, which doesn't
There
make
we go.
sense.
Perfect, got it.
But anyway, because she used the word elevator, I felt like that could have been a little bit of a safety issue, you know.
Okay.
But that is my opinion. And so, like I said, her and I would have talked about how we could word that a little bit differently to our tri-scuba students, to make everything rainbows and unicorns and fluffy and fun, and but yet safe and informative, right? So we want to introduce them to the wonderful world of scuba diving and introduce them to this equipment, and to keep them safe. Yes, we need to teach them how to use that equipment, but not ever put in their mind that they could use that to ascend, use the inflator button to ascend. So that is why I took a point off, but it would have been, sometimes I take a point off as a reminder to me to counsel them on that. And so I would have helped her kind of look at her statements that she made that caused me concern, and I would have helped her create her own teaching style to say it in a manner that is definitely, without a doubt, safe.
Sure.
Information in a logical sequence, zero problems with that at all. Delivered an environmental or safe diving practice message. I did not hear one. Did you?
I didn't. I gave her a 1 on there because I thought there had to have been something about in there. A candidate gave an unclear environmental safe message. It was appropriate. It was not appropriate to the scope of the topic about crashing in the bottom or anything like that. I couldn't see giving her a 0, but I thought at least a 1 was appropriate with balance and point. But
Yeah. So let's look at that criteria for 1. Candidate gave an unclear environmental or safe diving message, or it was not appropriate to the scope of the topic. Did she give an unclear environmental or safe diving message?
not really, truthfully. I think it was overall. It no.
But
I give her-
all of this kind of sometimes comes down to the interpretation of the instructor trainer. Could we have said, well, but she said don't use it at the inflate button as an elevator button. That was a bit of a safe diving practice message, right?
Yep. Okay.
We could have pulled that from there. I didn't give her any points because it was just, I just didn't hear a clear one,
Sure.
you know? But we are going to, it's impossible for us to not put our opinions into our evaluations. We just have to be able to back up our opinions and be flexible enough that if they can make a valid point for why they gave us a safe diving practice message and they can restate that safe diving practice message, we need to be humble enough to say, I agree, I messed up. Let me fix this score. Especially if it's close to pass fail, you know. Now when they've gotten a 53 and they're arguing that one little point, then I counsel them on don't just accept the win, you know, and accept the counsel of that evaluator on, because our job as an evaluator is to make them better instructors. So listen to our counsel, make a note, go home that night and marinate and think on it, and then see how you can use that counsel to make you a better instructor. So I don't usually like to argue one point, but if it's pass fail, you know, if they tell me that they said it, if they swear up and down that they said it and I didn't record it, I'm going to take their word for it. So I would have asked her, did you give me a safe diving practice message? Where are we? Okay.
We're at
Effectively used training aids. We pretended she had a BCD on, and I already said, this is your training aid. Did she give us more than one that was effectively used?
Not really.
Again, it's so hard because she's in her home. You know, she didn't have a whiteboard. She didn't have a BCD. She didn't have, you know, a PowerPoint presentation. Now, in all of the cue cards and everything that I sent you, I do provide my assistant instructor candidates with, because sometimes they don't have access to this information, but I provide them with the cue cards and I provide them with the PowerPoint, the pegs that SSI gives us to use, because as an assistant instructor, they will have access to that information. So had she been my candidate, I would have given her that information so that she would have all those wonderful tools that SSI gives us to use in her presentation, right? And I have no doubt that there was a peg for this one. And there's definitely a cue card for Try SCUBA. So maybe she could have used one of those as her training aid. In a real life scenario, in a classroom, I have no doubt she would have had more than just one training aid. But
There's a
still,
flip chart for that, but because I have this all downloaded, there's a flip chart, but not a peg for
okay.
this. Because I would imagine
Okay, but yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about. Let me go to OneDrive.
because I'm looking through it right now. There's um, imperial book, imperial card, imperial instructor manual, metric book queue, and there's a metric flip chart, and then a metric instructor manual, the records, and then let's see. I need to take this real quick. It take me just a minute. I'm going to mute you. Let's see. This is Benjamin. How can I help? Usually when that person calls that it's bad news or something, but wasn't bad news for me. It was bad news for them. So something I just had to deal with. Oh, I think we lost audio again. I wonder if it's on me. Let's see. Did I lose audio? Test. Nope, I got audio. Nope, still no audio for you. And you're not on mute. Let's see. I'm getting audio.
Did that fix it?
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Excellent. See, I'm getting used to this whole StreamYard instead of Zoom.
There you go. But yeah,
So
we were talking. There's flip charts on it, and I get the idea that the flip chart is most likely for the because we do this at the pool more than anything else.
Yeah.
So
So
I never actually noticed that until just now. So
we print this flip chart because I use it more if we're going to be in the classroom. I would use it as a peg, as a
Sure.
PowerPoint presentation, and go through it. We don't print a lot of stuff in Utila. We already discussed that. It's not. It just doesn't work well in our environment. And so, if I was going to use this during my presentation, we would hop in the classroom really quick and we would go through it. I could print it, I could laminate it, like you said, put it on a flip chart. There used to be a different SCUBA flip chart that I actually loved, that was like SSI. You could buy it from SSI, and I wish that I still had one, but I don't. But the only peg that she really could have used would have been the total diving system.
Sure.
And that just, I could have used it and said, okay, so the buoyancy system is part of our total diving system, but it's only one part, and I could have gone through the other parts. Now, we already had covered earlier in SCUBA the snorkeling system, the information system, proper breathing patterns. So we've already touched on some of the other parts of the total diving system, but she could have possibly used that slide had she wanted to. So I would have counseled her on what other things can we use. If your topic is the buoyancy system, what else could we have brought into the class to help add to our presentation? She could have brought in weight pockets, weight belt, weights. There's different types of weight belts. the ones where we have the pockets on the weight belts and the ones where we slide the weights on. And we together would have talked about other training aids that she could have used.
Sure.
I have seen the buoyancy system. People go a bit too far into Boyle's law, but she definitely could have talked about the different buoyancy characteristics of salt water versus fresh water, just barely touched on it and just kind of um, explained, today in the pool, we're going to be in fresh water and your buoyancy characteristics are going to be a little bit different when we go to the ocean. It is amazing how easily you float when we add that salt water to into our environment. And like I said, it's all our own personal teaching style. But I would have helped her think of other training aids that she could add for the next presentation. Because, like I said, we do at least 20 presentations between assistant instructor all the way through their ITC. I want to thoroughly train them so that when it's time for them to teach a class, they're not nervous. They know exactly what they need to do, and they don't need this to remind them of what their presentation needs to cover. It's just natural. Same with in-water presentations. Then motivation and class participation. It definitely would have been different had she had a BCD, because then, okay, Janine, stand up, go ahead and put this BCD on, because she said it has a clip down here, it has shoulder straps to adjust it up here, it has a corrugated hose that it has attached to that is your inflator and your deflator. Think that may have been when she said elevator. But anyway, if we had had that BCD, if we'd been at the dive center, I know without a doubt that it would have even been better. But she always asked so many questions and involved everybody in that discussion. So I gave her a 3 on that, as well as asked questions to evaluate the student's knowledge. How about you?
I agree completely on that. And we were one off on that one. So, which basically puts us 1 point apart between our evaluations thus far.
Okay. Well, and then she definitely restated her main points. I did hear that, but I did not hear a restating of the objective or the value. And I think that's where our difference is going to come from. Like I said, I would have asked her, did you restate the objective? What did you say in verbiage to make it measurable for being at the end of the discussion? So her objective was, today we're going to talk about the buoyancy system. I never heard that in those words at the end. Now, I love that you recorded it. We can go back. I might be incorrect. I may have missed it.
No, she didn't talk about the value, didn't give me value or the objectives, in my opinion, either.
Okay. Like I said, I will review the video, and I love that you video it, because then that takes my human error aspect out of the equation. Then if there is a question, you're in the classroom with your assistant instructor candidate, you can review, rewind. Okay, let's listen to your main points again. Were they the same main points that you gave us at the beginning? And so that's why I wrote down her main points on my scoring sheet, because now I know for a fact that she did give me those main points again.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, I like to evaluate knowledge then, but that's Janine's teaching style. Then if she missed the objectives and the value there, I would have counseled her on how she can prevent making that mistake again in the future. Not just, you got zeros, that was awful. It would have been, okay, I missed it, so let's think about how you can word it next time so I don't miss it. Could we say, okay, to restate the objectives of this session, or could we say, now that we have discussed the objectives of this session, which were da da da, you understand, and just help her put it in her words and in a way she's not going to forget. Maybe that is a counseling tip on use the whiteboard and write them up there. And during your summary, just tell yourself, think about it. I need to look back at that whiteboard because everything on that whiteboard, the objectives, the value, and the main points, I have to repeat. So maybe that's a counseling moment for her to realize, okay, if I can't remember it, if I get nervous on reading a piece of paper with my notes on it, maybe I could do a PowerPoint presentation and have the not instructor's notes. I don't know what it's called on a PowerPoint. I don't do PowerPoint presentations in PowerPoint, but it's like the presenter's view. Maybe she needs to put notes there, and then she won't forget. It has to meet her teaching style, but I need to help her create her teaching style so she doesn't forget that. And then restating the value again, both of those are the same counsel that I would give her. Did she accomplish her objectives? And I look back and I read her objective. Today, did we talk about the buoyancy system? Oh, most definitely. We definitely did. So I have to give her a 3 there. Accurate terminology, impression, speaking ability, and mannerisms. Like I said, I can take elevator off of the top or the bottom. I felt it was more unsafe than it was accurate terminology. So I took it off at the top and not at the bottom.
Sure.
Did you find any issue with her overall evaluation and delivery?
No.
Okay. Her time, we had her at 10 minutes. We had said the presentation could be 15 minutes. Again, had she had that BCD in her hand, we would have spent more time putting it on, tightening it up, learning how to do the Velcro prior to the waist clip. I didn't take any. I started to. I actually took a point off and then I put okay. That's beyond her control, because she isn't in a real world training environment. So, like you said, we're pretty close in our scoring. But
5 points apart on that one.
okay, so what was your total score?
43, and I show you gave her a 38.
Yes, that is correct. So because it was a 38, it is a pass. So I would start off with, that was a pass, so please don't worry about that anymore. Let's talk about your presentation. And I may not have even given her total score at the end. We may have just used this one as a counseling session and a training session to help her prepare the next topic. I also would have then said, well, Janine, you gave her the buoyancy system. That is such a small piece of the pie. Maybe next time I give her one that has the objective already put into it and has 2 or 3 clear main points.
Sure.
Now, I also would have counseled her if she had gone to the SCUBA manual, put it in the professional view. Under your buoyancy compensator, it says purpose, controls, a diver's buoyancy, materials, durable nylon, blah, 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 features, gives the features, use, gives the use, and it gives that value statement. So I may have counseled her on, since we don't have main points, and since there's nothing in bold, when I pull up that one page on the buoyancy compensator, could she have said the main points were purpose, materials, features, and use? And I would have counseled her in the lack of clear main points, go to that pro view and let's look at how we can use what SSI gives us to help us create a thorough presentation. But that's about it in a nutshell. Some people struggle more with academic teaching presentations than other people. where we teach, we get a tremendous amount of people who speak other languages. I will not teach a course unless I can speak their language or they can speak mine. But even though we all speak English, sometimes that language barrier can cause a problem. There was one candidate that I actually advised him to do his presentation for the examiner in Spanish because so we just kept struggling with his presentations. And at one point he was talking to another candidate in Spanish and he lit up and he was talking as fast as his little mouth would move. And I saw such a difference in him. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. You've just finished your presentation in English. I want you to give that same presentation in Spanish. And I had the other candidate, because she was the only one in the room who could speak Spanish. I said, I want you to help me evaluate him. Night and day difference. It was wonderful. And just watching him and his mannerisms and his excitement over the topic, he was in his element, and so I don't know how many people that you train that speak other languages that where English is not their first language. But sometimes it can even be, I'm from Texas. I talk pretty fast. And so I've had to force myself to talk slower. But when I'm passionate about something and when I'm excited about it, lots of times I will talk really fast. And if English is not their first language, they cannot understand me. So I do try to take all of these factors into account when I'm teaching them how to prepare to do these academic presentations. So,
Perfect.
anything else you would like to add? Because you are frozen.
Oh, am I? Okay. No, I think we hit everything on the head, and I mean, it sounds like we came out pretty close. We came to the same conclusion on presentation 1. We were a little farther off on presentation 2, but I see where there's a couple of things I'll sharpen up on. For example, section 3 or section 4 of effective use of training aids. I had missed the detail point that it needed to be more than one. And so that's something I'll even change in my own presentations, as well as I had missed that there need to be more than one. So I'll make it a point to improve my presentations just that much sharper myself by utilizing that advice and criteria. So no, it was informative and helpful. And I think I think I'm on the same sheet of music with you
Good.
overall. So I think it's good to go.
I'm very impressed with these first presentations that we were close. I love how thorough you are in preparing. There was no doubt in my mind that you've used these criteria in the past, and I did see you flip to it a few times when you were finalizing your evaluation, just to make sure that, because we want to score fairly. It's not my opinion; it's what the criteria says that I need to score, and I love that you did that, and I'm thoroughly impressed with the amount of knowledge that you have and preparation for this course. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.